Hey there, good morning. It's Tom Jordan. Got a very important program. You're looking at some of the video from the debate, not the debate, it seemed like a debate last night, but from the interview between Kamala Harris and Brett Baier on Fox News. We're going to get into that. We're also going to talk about major differences in economic policies between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, and it's going to have a major differing, I think, outcomes depending on which policies come to fruition. We're going to hone in on how you will likely fare financially under either a Donald Trump or a Kamala Harris administration. Also, after my discussion with the economist Gary Wolfram with Hillsdale College, we're going to go look at this interview last night with Kamala Harris and Brett Baier, which occurred on Fox News. It's about a half hour. It started late, kind of ended early, based on Kamala Harris' punctuality, I think. But strange as it was, Kamala acting like just she's running against an incumbent, that the past 3 years in office were actually Donald Trump's policies. We're going to play some of the most fiery and often strange portions of that interview in just a bit. All right, that's just seconds away. Apologize, we have a few hiccups here technically, but I'm the guy behind the screen here. That's just seconds away. We'll get into that. Also, just a reminder to chime in. You can comment or you can ask questions in the comment section, and I will get to those in just a moment. And by the way, the best way, I know I look like Kamala Harris right now, but I promise you I am not. I'm the guy. There I am. Hello. Also, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply, there we go, simply to chime in and then subscribe and click that notification bell as well. We're going to take your comments. We're going to take your questions, and I would like to pose some of those questions to my guest today. So please feel free to put those up on the screen. We'll ask those of our guests. Listen, high inflation means high cost of living. We know that's the case. Kamala Harris claims Donald Trump's policies would lead to higher inflation, and Donald Trump says, "What? It didn't happen in my first term, but it sure did happen in your first term, Kamala Harris, with Joe Biden." So who's right in this back and forth? Economists disagree on this issue. And, there are debts and there are deficits. There's decreasing or increasing revenues based on corporations being taxed at a high rate versus being taxed at a lower rate. How does this all work? And what about tariffs? We factor this into it. Kamala Harris says a tariff from Donald Trump is equivalent to a 20% sales tax. You've probably seen the commercials or the accusations of that last debate that Donald Trump wants to install a sales tax. Trump scoffs at that notion and says, actually, no, it's going to lead to even lower costs of products and goods because of the exorbitant increase in revenue for companies that will end up building their products and goods in the United States instead of overseas. Again, economists disagree on this. Kamala Harris wants to give certain groups of people money, $20,000 here, $25,000 there, depending on your genetic makeup, it seems, or your inability to afford a home. So they're going to give you money for that. Donald Trump says he wants to free up the markets from government intervention so all groups of people can thrive economically. So when I said that economists disagree on these economic policy issues from Trump and Harris, it's pretty obvious. Their disagreement is front and center. This was Donald Trump in Chicago. He's speaking to the Chicago Economic Forum the other day, and Donald Trump was interviewed by Bloomberg's editor-in-chief at the Chicago Economic Club. That guy does not, openly he admits, does not like Donald Trump. John Micklethwait is his name, and he's known for not liking Donald Trump. He's known for that. So Trump even acknowledged his disfavored status at the top of that interview, so you knew it was going to be somewhat disagreeable. And it was. But they kept their cool for the most part. It was a good discussion. I really thought I enjoyed it. And I'm going to play some clips at the end of the interview here in a moment. But first, let's dig in to all of this with one of my favorite economists, Gary Wolfram. Gary Wolfram is a William Simon Professor of Economics and Public Policy, Director of Economics, Professor of Political Economy at Hillsdale College. Sir, it's really nice to have you in the program. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
You betcha. I want to, I guess, start right off kind of how they started off with this Bloomberg discussion in Chicago, the idea of tariffs. There is a major disagreement between, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump on this issue, and even some, conservatives are not really in favor of this idea that Donald Trump says is going to work. So his first term in office, he talked a lot about this. He implemented these tariffs, and he achieved 4 years with no inflation. Yet economists argue that his future tariffs could drive up prices. That tariffs encourage companies to relocate manufacturing back to the United States is what he says, which he says is going to foster job growth. Where do you stand on this whole issue? What's the reality of putting tariffs on foreign businesses that do set up shop overseas and selling their products over here in the United States?
Well, I believe in free trade, and if you go back to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, he even talks about it there. Actually, there's an economist at George Mason University, Don Boudreaux, has spoken well on free trade. But I really think that what's going on is that Trump is using the threat of tariffs in order to get other countries to reduce their tariffs and other countries to not be as insulated in terms of what they're trying to do with their single manufacturing. And I think he's really using the tariff threat as a way of reducing tariffs. That's my opinion. But it is true that tariffs do increase the cost of things, and reducing trade. I mean, we all are better off when we trade. I benefit from trade and you benefit from trade. And so the more options that we have to buy things from, let's say we're to buy things from Mexico or buy things from, Argentina or whatever, that would make it less expensive for us to do that. And so again, I'm what I would call a free trader. But I really think that Trump is using this tariff issue as a mechanism to try to get other countries to reduce their tariffs on what we have and to actually open up the worldwide economy.
Yeah. Do you think though and I'm with you. I'm big on free trade as well, but free trade implies that it's fair also. And there are, we're paying higher tariffs, you want to call it that, versus other countries. So we export, things to China. It's not exactly fair. Does he have a point in that regard? And will that bring down tariffs on our side of it as well?
Well, China's an interesting observation, because China actually it's not a fully based market economy. What happens is that the communist Chinese, they own a number of the companies, and Xi is actually trying to move back into central planning. And we also have to, it may be that we're interested in international relations in terms of, is China a military threat? And if so, then our behavior may be different with dealing with the military issues as well. So I think that is conceivably what could be going on with China in particular.
Yeah, and he's also Donald Trump has been when he's been asked this question quite a bit about tariffs and his reasoning behind it. And he says, "Listen, what's going to happen here?" And he's kind of making it known that he's using this as a negotiating tool. It's a tactic, and primarily to bring back these American companies who are setting shop overseas, like in Mexico, like in China, bring them back here to the United States and start doing business back here. And if they do that, there will be no tariffs on them. And he said, it doesn't matter what I say. It could be 100% tariffs, it could be 200%, it could be 500%. That's not the point. The point is, I'm trying to get these companies to come back to the United States. Is that something
Well,
you believe will work?
well, I think what is more likely to work is that if you reduce the corporate income tax,
Mm.
I think that is really something that would act to increase economic activity, in particular manufacturing in the United States. But there's also a large portion of our economic activities in the service sector as well. So you might want to think of it from that end. But I do think that actually reducing the corporate income tax, which is what Donald Trump did, and that we have to worry about if Kamala Harris were to win, then the reduction in the corporate income tax would expire in 2025. And that would be a real problem for us in terms of our economy.
Yeah, Zai, I'm glad you brought that up because that is another big issue here. And she does want to raise the corporate tax rate. Once again, in her arguments, these billionaires have to pay their fair share. Donald Trump wants to bring it, I believe, even further down from where it was even when he brought it down in his first term of office. So can you explain how that works? Why is that good for, corporations to pay less in their tax rate or a lower tax rate and less into the coffers, if you want to say it like that, putting more of this money into the federal government, and how does that end up helping, the revenue that pours into this country?
Well, okay, a couple of things. One is to notice that when Trump, the cut in the corporate income tax brought us down from the highest income, the corporate income tax among the OECD countries to about the median. And if you just look at the numbers, what's happened to corporate income tax revenues that have come into the federal government, they have hit an all-time record. They were around $220 billion when in 2017, and last year there were over $440 billion. So Arthur Laffer, you've probably
Yes.
know Arthur.
Oh, the curve, the Laffer
Yes, the
curve.
Laffer curve, exactly. In fact, Arthur signed a napkin for me and drew that Laffer curve for me. And it's in my office there in Hillsdale.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's one thing. But two is that corporations don't pay taxes, right? I mean, if you sort of think through that, someone is going to pay the tax. It's either going to be the employers of the corporations. It's going to be the consumers. It's going to be labor. It's going to filter throughout the economy, and that's one thing that it's one thing that people don't understand, and that's one reason that and it's complicated, but it's a matter of what. Sherlock Holmes said to Watson, he says, the problem you Watson is you see, but you don't observe.
Hmm.
And that's what people that want to raise the corporate income tax are thinking, that people will see, but they won't observe. They won't notice that, oh, wow, when we raise the corporate income tax, A, corporate income tax revenues are going to go down, and B, it's going to have higher prices, it's going to have lower wages. There's going to be less production in the United States when we have a corporate income tax. And the
Yeah.
last part is that,
Yep.
are they paying their fair share? Now, think about this. The top 1% of the income distribution pay about half of the total income taxes paid. So, and the bottom 50% pay less than 5% of total income taxes. So the question is, are the wealthy paying their fair share, or are they paying more than their fair share?
Yeah, that's not fair at all, in my view. And I think you've brought up and you've written about this extensively regarding how these higher, like marginalized tax rates, they actually end up hurting a whole, slew of individuals, including the people who are work for a living. The labor market gets hurt by this. It discourages work, is what you've said. It discourages savings. And it discourages investment. So these tax incentives, they would reduce these rates. It could motivate these businesses to invest more domestically. And I love what you've written about this because it's common sense. You mentioned Art Laffer and all these individuals, but can you explain, how does increased government borrowing, which is what we're doing right now, and then the higher tax rates, this whole issue caused by these, these resulting deficits that we're seeing as well. How does that all negate the benefits of these tax cuts over time, in your view?
Well, a couple of things. One is it causes inflation, and the reason it does that is there's a complicated relation. Like when the government goes out and it spends, it can raise taxes in order to fund that, but people don't want their taxes to go up. So what the government does is it borrows. The federal government goes out and borrows money by selling treasury bonds. Well, if they go out again, this is a little bit complicated, and that's why again, this is a matter of seeing and observing. That is, when the Federal Reserve buys up the bonds, it increases. Well, first of all, when the Treasury sells the bonds, it turns out that increases interest rates because the supply of bonds is going up. Bond prices go down, interest rates go up. Well, then people get irritated with interest rates going up. So what happens is the Federal Reserve buys the bonds in order to keep the interest rates from going up. But what that does is that increases the reserves of banks, which leads to an increase in the money supply and eventually leads to inflation. Now, what happens is the average person doesn't recognize how all this works, right? They haven't had Econ 203 or whatever. And so they think that it is these mean corporations that are raising prices. And so you get things like this price gouging bill, which is a bunch of nonsense that is going to just cause shortages. But this price gouging bill that Harris has proposed is really just relying on people not knowing what that linkage is. And so because it's a little complicated, I think that Donald Trump understands this. In fact, if you look at the deficits that were the average deficit under the first 3 years of the Trump administration, and then if you drop out 202 and 203 for the coronavirus, et cetera, so you can drop out the first year of the Biden administration, their average deficit was 1.6 trillion, so double what the Trump administration had in terms of deficits.
Yeah, we often forget that there was a pandemic and there was a need, in this strange, need at the first time probably in 100 years that we've had to have this kind of government intervention. And I'm not even convinced we had to have that. We shouldn't even have done all those lockdowns, but that's another conversation, probably for another day. That we kind of, is self-harm that we inflicted on ourselves.
Just the point being is that Trump wasn't essentially really good on deficits, but certainly it was half of what Biden administration has had.
Right. And people play with the numbers, and they conveniently leave out the fact that we had a pandemic during that time. And that's what's kind of skewed the Donald Trump numbers. But the policy of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will necessarily lead to increased deficits and increased debt. And since you brought up price controls, I think this is such an important topic because it's astounding to me that Kamala Harris is kind of running on this. This is one of the aspects of her campaign, that we're going to crack down on what she claims is, price gouging from these, grocery stores who have very, very slim margins. I think it's about 1% when you compare it to these other industries which are thriving. But you look at what really caused inflation and the denial of this. So you look at the Federal Reserve. They increased the money supply, by 38% between 2020 and 2021. That was smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. And they had to cover all this unprecedented government spending. The money just doesn't grow on trees. It kind of does if you want to consider that factor, what the Federal Reserve had to do there. So they triggered the worst inflation in more than 40 years. Can you touch on that? Because I'm astounded at how many, I don't know if they're faux economists or not, or they're partisan economists, how many people have come out and said, no, the inflation was not caused by this overspending by the government. But I'm looking at it, I've looked at different models as well. I'm like, okay, well, consumer prices have risen 22% or so over the past 3 years, and it happens to coincide directly with the amount of government spending that has occurred during that same time frame. Do you believe that inflation was most primarily and directly related to that increase in government spending?
Oh, definitely. If in fact, Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize winner, said that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomena. And you're exactly right. The money supply grew by a substantial amount for a 2-year period. And then what happened? Then where there was a lag, that's like Friedman said, is that the lags are long and variable. And then we start getting inflation. And what happened was this isn't noted very well, but anyway, the Federal Reserve started paying banks in order to keep their reserves at the banks. And that's why they were able to, over a long period of time, they were able to keep the interest rates low and there wasn't much inflation. But Then what happened is that eventually that money started moving back out into the economy, as I was saying. Once the banks have reserves, those reserves, they were paying the banks to keep their reserves at the Federal Reserve, so it wasn't leaking out into the economy and increasing the money supply. But then, as you pointed out, it started leaking out into the money supply, and that's when the inflation happened. And so it is this mechanism to cover the substantial debt that has been run, to as I was talking about how that linkage all works, to hold that money, to hold those reserves of banks in the Federal Reserve and not let it leak out into the money supply. That worked for a while. But that was also, people aren't well aware that was a major change in how the Federal Reserve handles monetary policy. It was paying banks to hold reserves at the Fed.
So there's this, I think it's a ruse right now going on that somehow the reason why prices went up and the cost of living has increased so dramatically over the past 3.5 years was because corporations decided to take advantage of individuals, and they're greedy. And as you said, these are evil corporations. So you got this price, that they were price fixing is essentially what they're doing, and price gouging these innocent citizens of this country. So Kamala Harris comes in and says we need to control this, and she highlights grocery stores. But to me, the price fixing here in what you're asking these private corporations to do, or demanding that they do, mandating that they do, it disrupts this natural relationship that the free markets provide, right, between prices and profit margins, and dictates who's going to, supply and demand.
Well, prices I tell my students, 9 million people woke up today in New York City, and there was exactly the right amount of Starbucks coffee and exactly the right amount of peanuts and everything else. That's just amazing, right? We really should be astounded that happens. But why that happens is because the price system makes that happen. If what happens is there's a shortage of something, well, then what will happen? Prices will start to rise. And when prices rise, then the quantity supplied will be going up and the quantity demanded will be going down, and it'll sort of get back towards equilibrium. But when you do is when the government sets the price, then you end up with shortages, and you end up with exactly the problem that we would have if you in fact pass this price gouging law. You're going to walk into the Kroger's, or Walmart's actually one of the largest grocery sellers. You'd walk in there, and there'd be a shortage of food out there. And so, the government can't just set the price. The price is the mechanism by which free markets work, that are based on voluntary exchange. And I have what if the demand goes up for something? What do I want to have happen? I want the price to start going up, which would encourage producers to make more of the stuff, and we wouldn't have excess demand. If I set the price too low, then what's going to happen is that, again, you're just going to create shortages. If we could, why doesn't the government just make everything free, right? I mean, if they can set the grocery store prices at whatever Kamala Harris wants it to be set at, why not just cut prices in half for groceries?
Right, because and they use that word free a lot, but it's not really free, because the rest of us, whoever that is, the taxpayers, end up paying for these things. And to that point, what do you make of, her desire to give these, free, subsidies for home buyers, $25,000 here for a down payment? Or what about this latest thing that she wants to provide forgivable loans to certain African-American men of $20,000 to start a business? Is that a smart economic policy, do you think?
Well, I mean, just think about it. What happened? Okay, if we say, housing prices are sufficiently high that a first-time home buyer has trouble buying a house and moving out of their rental unit. Well, what if we give everybody that's a first-time home buyer $25,000? What that will do is increase the demand for such housing and cause prices to go up even more, right? If you just sort of think about it.
Yeah,
There's all sorts of government regulations that limit the amount of housing that you can build, particularly low-income housing. And the shortage of low-income housing is often most often the case that it is happening because you've got a restriction on the supply. Government is restricting the supply of such production. I think you'll end up with exactly the opposite of what you'd want to have happen if you implemented such a thing. For why can we? You don't want to have the government pick winners and losers. Okay, I mean that. Friedrich Hayek, also another Nobel laureate, wrote about this in a book called The Constitution of Liberty that he wrote in 1960. But the point is that if we say, okay, the government can now give this set of people a money to start a business, but not the other set of people, who gets to decide then which set of people gets the benefit and which people don't get the benefit, and where is the benefit coming from? You're exactly right. Taxpayers in general are having to pay to subsidize these folks. And, if you sort of think about it, Jeff Bezos, what happened? He just dropped out of school, right? I mean, profit, what I talk about is profit is the incentive to innovate, and innovation takes risk. Starting a business takes risk. And so the benefit of profit is what you want to have out there. That is the thing that will give people's incentive to take on the risk of starting a business, not the government taxing the rest of us to give to a certain subset of people who are going to start a business. Why should I care who starts this business, whether they're male or female or Hispanic or whatever they might be? Why are we picking certain groups to benefit from taxpayer largesse?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's a huge risk, and that's often ignored in terms of when somebody like a Jeff Bezos or somebody else becomes incredibly successful. It took years, sometimes decades of risks and failures and a lot of lost money to get to that point. And when they succeed, all of a sudden they're wanting to punish them for doing just that. And to that point, real quick, I want to talk about healthcare real quick, but you talk about picking winners and losers, and Kamala Harris now is considering this idea of reparations. And she said in the statement, she said, listen, I will be president to all. That being said, and then she went on to explain why, certain people might need more attention from her than others based on their immutable traits, the color of their skin. So we need to consider, studying and researching, giving, reparations to an entire group of people based on the color of their skin. Economically speaking, not politically or anything like that nature or partisan, but economically speaking, what would that look like in terms of, potential? I know there's studies have already been done on reparations for African Americans, but what would that realistically cost the rest of Americans in via taxes or otherwise?
Well, there's a couple things. In fact, I was just teaching this in my class. Hayek, in his book Constitution of Liberty, points out that you can't be held responsible for the actions of others. The reason we want you to be responsible for your actions is because you'll behave in a more productive way. And that it doesn't make, and in fact, he even says that if you have, the reason you have things like, he didn't say the Hatfields and McCoys, but basically that's what he's talking about is how can you have conflicts that go over, for generations? It's because you're attaching a responsibility to someone who did not actually perform the action. And so this Hayek would be very much opposed to the idea of reparations. And if, again, this is just a matter of picking in winners and losers. Look, I tell my students, my grandmother, get this, my grandmother actually lived in a tar paper shack in the middle of the Mojave Desert with no running water, no electricity. And we didn't think that Grammy was poor and that somehow the government ought to be helping her out, right? And so, are we going to go back and say, well, wow, Gary Wolfram's grandmother, she had to live, her husband was working in a paint factory and ended up, dying of lung cancer. And so we need to help Gary Wolfram out, that would be saying the same thing. So again, it's just a matter of government picking winners and losers. And to call it reparations is just a matter, it's some way to people who haven't thought about it, again, seeing and observing, people who haven't thought about, and read Hayek and said, well, wait a minute, how can I be held responsible for actions that someone else does? That's going to cause all sorts of problems.
Yeah.
And another thing about when you're not held responsible for your actions that someone else is, they will coerce you, right? So if the government is going to be responsible for taking care of the poor or whatever, the government is going to here's people what they can't do and they can do, et cetera. And so again, I recommend Hayek's book, The Constitution of Liberty, which he wrote in 1960.
Also, people should go to take your online courses on economics and whatnot. At I've done it in years past. I've gone on to Hillsdale and taken your courses specifically because it's brilliant. It gives you a great understanding of how the economy works in the free markets and why the United States is so different and more prosperous and successful than these other nations who have tried these other things. There's already been case studies all over the world. Even today, we could look at and say, yeah, that's not going to work. Socialism always leads to ruin for the most part. Same with communism or whatnot. We do have a question. I want to bring this up here. I want to get our viewers involved here. I think Adam's got one of the questions we can pop up here on the screen for Gary Wolfram with Hillsdale College. Mel, love this topic. Economic literacy is very important. Hope to see more experts in this area on the show. Thank you. That's Mel chiming in. What do you think? What do you say to that, Gary? When you see that, you talk about this basically very shallow understanding. When politicians can come out and say it's not fair that this whole group of people doesn't have money, so we're going to take from that group of people and give it to that group of people, it's a very shallow understanding of economics. What is your take on, and I know Hillsdale is kind of an outlier because you guys are brilliant over there, the way you teach these lessons and why, and the foundational reasoning behind these lessons and why we're fundamentally different than, say, Venezuela or what the Soviet Union was or Cuba and those types of areas in China. But what do you make of the high schools and the middle schools and the elementary schools? Why have we gotten away, do you believe, in our society of teaching, financial literacy?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just financial literacy. It's teaching how the market system works and how does it compare to central planning. In fact, a really good book, again, another really good book that I have my students read is called Liberalism in the Classical Tradition by Ludwig von Mises. And it's a little book that he wrote in 1927 when the Roaring Twenties is going on. And he predicts the Great Depression. He predicts World War II. He predicts the fascists will start World War II. He predicts prohibition's going to fail. And it was the only constitutional amendment that was ever repealed, all based on a change in political philosophy that he was observing away from the idea of limited government and free markets. Again, he explains why socialism cannot create wealth for the masses. And I say to my students, okay, I'm God, and you're going to be placed at any country in the world that you want, but you're going to be the poorest person there, right? You don't say, oh, gee, I want to be in the Dominican Republic of Congo. I want to be in Venezuela, right? You're going to pick a country that's in the free market area. You're going to pick Canada or the United States. And so, again, it's a matter of seeing and observing, that is, and that's one thing I think that we work on at Hillsdale is to get people to observe that. I mean, again, it's if someone said that to you and you clearly wouldn't say, oh yeah, put me in a centrally planned state. You wouldn't think that, oh, well, maybe the government of the United States should become more centrally planned. You'd be thinking, wow, maybe we should become more free market. And there's the freedom, there's an index of economic freedom that the Fraser Institute puts out. And if it has some nice data on if you're in the poorest 10% of the income distribution, you're 11 times wealthier if you're in a country that's in the top 25% of their index of economic freedom than if you're in the bottom 25%. So you really, you're 11 times wealthier if you're poor in a place that has market capitalism and leans towards limited government than if you're in a centrally planned state where the government is in there intervening a lot.
Yeah, people really need to understand when the political philosophies and ideologies in this country began to change. And you can go back to Woodrow Wilson. You go back to Teddy Roosevelt. He's a Republican, but he was one of the original progressives, as was Woodrow Wilson. And then you look what
Hmm.
FDR did, and you guys argue at Hillsdale that he prolonged the Great Depression based on his progressive policies. He actually did more harm
Oh,
than good, but he's so lauded nowadays as this great
yes.
guy that provided so much good and welfare for the individuals. No, no, he actually prolonged the Depression by years compared to other nations.
That is correct. I mean,
Yeah,
and some people think that World War II got us out of the Depression, but it wasn't really that. It was World War II. The reason that it sort of looks like that is just the way that the gross domestic product is calculated. It is calculated by government spending shows up as gross domestic product, no matter
right.
what the value is. If I pay people to dig holes and fill them up again, then that's going to increase GDP, and it'll look like the economy's doing better. And so that's really, it turned out that, in fact, Mises in that same book, he says that that these government make work programs aren't gonna work either. Which is there were that's what Roosevelt had a bunch of these things. Well, and of course, if you look at the unemployment rate, it was still at 17% at the end of his term. So it's really not something that government intervention leads to less for everyone, and in particular, less for the poor.
Yeah.
Um, and these guys that I said to my students, oh, how many have ever used a Microsoft product, right? They all raise their hand, and I say, okay, that's why the guy who started Microsoft is wealthy and you're not, right?
Right.
If you make something that millions and millions of people around the world want and are willing to pay for, then you're going to get wealthier than somebody that is not very productive.
Right. It stimulates, ideas and creativity, and it prompts you to take risks if you find a demand out there that's not being met. You bring up these work programs. I was just up in northern Michigan, and you probably know that Michigan is filled with trees, and it probably always has had plenty of trees. Well, FDR back then, the Great Depression, decided a great work program would give a bunch of jobs to a bunch of people to go up to northern Michigan and plant a bunch of trees. And for no reason, I was just up there. I viewed this forest that was a little bit different than the forest right next to it. But that forest was built up by FDR for no reason other to give people jobs. It had no benefit to anybody else except here's some taxpayer money so you guys can work.
Yes.
And I'm suddenly the savior now because I gave you a job at taxpayer expense with no purpose
Yes.
for that job. Otherwise, to plant trees in an already forested area. It's
That's
just like,
right. That's right.
yeah, so it's absurd. I want to get your take on this. And I'll let you go. You give me a lot of time here, but healthcare. Kamala Harris, she's come out and she's a big supporter of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and she has touted in the past the benefits of government-funded healthcare for all. She wants to get away from the private healthcare industry.
Mhm.
She said as much. She denies it now, but this has been I've covered her for many, many years out in California, and I know how she thinks. She denies it now, but Medicare for all is how it's known, doing away with private insurance. And her reasoning is that it will both provide health care for all and it will make it more affordable for all. Is that true?
Well, you can make it more affordable for all by making it free, right? but somebody's going to end up having to pay for it, and that's going to be the taxpayer is going to end up paying for it. And John Goodman has a very good book called Priceless on why the healthcare profession is goofed in the sense that when you go in to see if you go in to see the doctor and he says, well, you should do X, you don't say, well, how much does that cost? You say, does insurance pay for it, right? Does Medicare pay for it? And so it is, the pricing system is not working as well as it otherwise could have. There are systems where you can pay to join a healthcare group, and the doctors will see you, and you pay so much to be in it. So there are mechanisms that the private sector could have but movement towards a well, for all, for
Medicare for all.
Medicare
Yeah.
for all,
Yeah.
is how are we going to distinguish between whether you should have have this operation or this treatment? How are we going to know which treatment is going to be more effective? It will just depend on how the government is paying the providers, right? I mean, the government is going to be, if it's a healthcare for all, the government's going to be paying the providers, and so the whoever is, and it's not, again, it's not government. There's going to be bureaucrats in the
Yes.
government. That's another
Right.
thing that Mises and Hayek talk about. There'll be some government bureaucrats deciding whether you're going to get this, or whether people in general are going to be able to have this operation or have this treatment or physical therapy, or however that works. It's going to be bureaucrats who are deciding a whole thing rather than the market. We should probably be moving in the other direction and moving towards more private healthcare.
Yeah, and that's happening right now. And I'll give you just one quick example. I'll let you go. But the unions kind of in a sense can act as kind of a bureaucracy, because I had a procedure I had to get done. It was prescribed by my physician. So you need to get this done. So I went and got an approval for that. The insurance company approved it as well. And I was going in to get it done, and suddenly I got a call that it was denied. I said, "Why was it denied?" He goes, "Well, your union stepped in, and they said." They're in a different state, and they said, "You don't need this procedure." I'm like, "Who are they?" The union stepped in against the advice of my doctor, and my insurance company said, "No, we're not going to allow you to get that." And I was stunned by that. But that just kind of, that's an example of what the bureaucratic state might kind of look like in this decision-making process about your healthcare behind some silo in some other state. Someone that's never met you or ever examined you are making this decision based on what it's going to cost them to do it. I really encourage people to go to Hillsdale and check out Gary Wolfram. You're my favorite economist. I have another guy too named Patrick Anderson. He's phenomenal as well. But
I'm a good friend of Patrick.
Yeah, he's a good guy, isn't he? Yeah. So you two are like tops in my view, and I think most people's view as well. Very well respected. Gary Wolfram is a William Simon Professor of Economics and Public Policy, Director of Economics, and Professor of Political Economy at Hillsdale College. Gary, so good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
You got it. We'll talk again soon. Yeah, go check it out. And I tell you, I learned a lot by just going on their online courses. They provide them for free. And it's if you want to get a true understanding of economics, the free market versus, socialism versus communism versus, capitalism, is a pretty good outline. And they go back to founding documents, not the stuff you hear nowadays about how capitalism is evil, as touted by a socialist. So, all right, we're going to get into what happened last night. First of all, the back and forth at the Chicago Economic Club was very informative while we're on the topic of economics, because we saw two very different perspectives on the economy. Again, this is Donald Trump being interviewed by Bloomberg editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite. Let's listen into this portion of that interview.
If you add up all the promises you've made, and your plans would add $7.5 trillion to the debt. That's more than twice the total for Vice President Harris. You're on course to push up debt up to 150% of GDP. This is a very business-like audience.
Yeah.
Why should they trust you with that?
Because we're about growth. She's got no growth whatsoever, and we're all about growth. We're going to bring companies back to our country. You look at, even today, as I was driving over, I see these empty, old, beautiful, steel mills and factories that are empty and falling down. Some have been converted to senior citizens' homes, but that's not going to do the trick. And we're going to bring the companies back. We're going to lower taxes still further for companies that are going to make their product in the USA. We're going to protect those companies with strong tariffs, because I'm a believer in tariffs. I'm not sure that you are. I don't think you are, but I congratulate you on your career. But to me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff.
Can you say yes or no whether you have talked to Vladimir Putin since you stopped being president?
Well, I don't comment on that, but I will tell you that. If I did, it's a smart thing. If I'm friendly with people, if I have a relationship with people, That's a good thing, not a bad thing, in terms of a country. He's got 2,000 nuclear weapons, and so do we. China has a lot less, but they'll catch us within 5 years.
That sounds very
If I
much
have a
like-
relationship, I don't talk about that.
You've gone backwards and forwards about
Depends
whether
on the
you want to
times.
whether you want to keep Jerome Powell as chair of the Federal Reserve. His term as chair runs on to May 2026. Would you seek to remove or demote him?
Look, I think it's the greatest job in government. You show up to the office once a month and you say, let's see, flip a coin. And everybody talks about you like you're a god. Oh, what will he do? I mean, before, the guy used to walk into my office, he was like begging, he was fine.
But you did talk
You know
about
what,
you talked about removing him once.
I did, because he was keeping the rates too high.
Yeah.
And I was right.
And you would do that again.
In fact, he actually dropped them too much when I did this, because I said I was threatening to terminate him. There was a question as to whether or not you could. I think I have the right to say, as a very good businessman and somebody that's used a lot of sense, I think I have the right to say that, you know, I think I'm better than he would be. I think I'm better than most people would be in that position. I think I have the right to say I think you should go up or down a little bit. I don't think I should be allowed to order it, but I think I have the right to put in comments as to whether or not interest rates should go up or down.
All right. Donald Trump there speaking with Bloomberg News. And, you know, a lot of kind of potentially trap questions there by Bloomberg. But the deal is that Donald Trump was right about a lot of economic policies, and a lot of the more socialist-leaning economists don't like that because they don't necessarily believe in the free market. And by the way, you've probably seen the headlines that Donald Trump refuses to acknowledge whether or not he's spoken with Vladimir Putin. You heard what he really said there. He says, I'm not going to talk about that because the whole point is he wants to negotiate. And if he reveals too much about what he said with these world leaders, it's not good for this country. But he does say it's good that I do talk with him. And it is. It doesn't mean he likes him or he thinks he's this great leader that he wants to become like or that he's under his thumb. It means that, unlike Joe Biden, Donald Trump is willing to go into, Moscow. He's willing to go into North Korea, for crying out loud, and confront these world leaders who are a direct threat to the United States. And good for him for doing that. So he does talk with them, and it's a good thing that he does. Not that he supports them, but what they do is a direct threat to the United States. So good for him for speaking with world leaders. And by the way, Joe Biden speaks with President Xi Jinping from China quite often. He even called him a friend, and he's probably the biggest threat, he and Iran, those to the United States right now. All right. I want to talk about this, and I'm sorry it took so long to get to this, because that interview with Kamala Harris last night on Fox News. Let's start with this clip. It's the border, and Kamala Harris's gross mischaracterization of how she tried to help the border, when in reality, one of her first moves in Joe Biden was to actually not help the border, but to allow it to continue to flow with illegal immigrants, to knock it down, essentially, or figuratively knock down the border, to attempt to allow all of these illegal immigrants to gain citizen status. That's one of the first things she did in office. Let's watch this.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration, because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a
which
number.
Is,
do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a
an
rough
immigration
estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question. I promise you.
I was beginning to answer. The first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the. Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish.
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
I'm
and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising,
Okay.
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
State
Madam Vice President, a couple of things.
prosecuted trafficking of drugs,
Six-
guns, and human beings. And
six
Donald
Democrats-
Trump, but let me just finish.
six
And
Democrats
Donald
voted
Trump
against that bill.
learned about that bill and told them to kill it because he preferred to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And in this election, this is rightly a discussion that the American people want to have. And what they want are solutions, and they want a president of the United States who's not playing political games with the issue,
I hear you.
but actually is focused on fixing
Six
it.
Democrats voted against that bill. It would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it.
He talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the president of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
All right, all that is feign outrage. She's not really mad because she's completely making that up, and she knows it. Donald Trump has never said, I'm going to go lock people up for disagreeing with me. In fact, the opposite has been true. They're trying to lock him up. And see how they do that, how they project on Donald Trump? The very things they're doing to him, they are blaming him for trying to do to others. Donald Trump, and we're going to hear a clip from Kamala Harris talking about the enemy within and how she is trying to claim that means U.S. citizens. No, he's talking about terrorists who are within our country, and we need to go get them and then lock them up. See how they mischaracterize Donald Trump's statements. There are enemies within this country, not the citizens, but the people who are trying to do us direct harm. And her best strategy is to ignore the problem. And back to the whole original border bill, the U.S. Citizen Immigration Act, which she said was the first bill we tried to fix the immigration problem in this country. When they say they want to fix the immigration problem, what Kamala Harris is saying is that it doesn't allow enough illegal immigrants to gain U.S. citizenship status. So that's what I want to fix, is what she is saying. In reality, no, they came across into this country illegally, and they're not supposed to be here. And on top of that other bill that she says Donald Trump tried to kill, what really happened is that enough Democrats and enough Republicans said, listen, we are still going to allow 1.8 million illegal immigrants into this country every year. That's what you think is a good bill that's going to solve the problem? No, it's going to exacerbate the issue that it already is at crisis level. It's going to make it worse. Plus, in that bill, it gives those illegal immigrants a pathway to citizenship. That's why that bill was killed, not because Donald Trump wanted political expediency. You can make that argument clearly and objectively against Kamala Harris. All right, that's that. A few more words here. Let's see what else happened last night. Brett Baier and Kamala Harris.
Because it's every commercial, but many of them add noise, but a few of them seem to break through. This particular one from the Trump campaign has gotten a lot of attention.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
So are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing, stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you know what? You got to
happened
take
during
responsible for what
his
happened
presidency.
in your administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in his presidency.
It's in
so
black and white.
would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassignment surgeries?
I will follow the law, just as I think Donald Trump would say he did.
You would have a say as president.
Like I said, I think it's real. He spent $20 million on those ads, trying to create a sense of fear in the voters because he actually has no plan in this election that is about focusing on the needs of the American people. Whereas, at $20 million on that ad, on an issue that, as it relates to the biggest issues that affect the American people, It's really quite remote. And again, his policy was no different. Look at where we are, though.
They say
on
it was
plans for
different,
the
but we'll
American
move
people,
on.
I'm offering a plan to deal with affordable housing. I'm offering a plan to deal with what we need to do to strengthen small businesses, which are the backbone of America's economy. I am offering a plan that is about taking care of young parents and giving them the support they need.
All right, giving them the support. She wants to give them money. She wants to give home buyers money for a down payment, and she wants to take care of those things. The government is going to hand out taxpayer money, and it's going to end up going to cost everybody a lot more money as it is. That'll necessarily, we just heard Gary Wolfram talk about this issue. The more the government spends by giving people money, first of all, it de-incentivizes them to go out and work and earn the money, but it also jacks up the price and the cost of living. It jacks up the rate of inflation, and it will jack up the cost of homes. And your mortgages are going to go up, and the interest rates are going to go up as well. All of this is a ruse to pretend that the government is going to take care of you, rather than they're not doing it. They're doing the exact opposite. And the notion that this issue of that, first of all, Donald Trump, you heard Brett Baier saying, good for him, he did a great job last night. Not a single gender transition surgery had taken place during Donald Trump's administration in the federal prison system because he wouldn't allow it. Taxpayer dollars should not be going towards prisoners getting sex changes and illegal immigrants getting sex changes. Kamala Harris says she advocates for that. She completely supports it. And she refused to answer the question honestly in that exchange. One more exchange, and then we'll wrap it up after this. Take a look at this.
Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years. So what are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we've been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other. Rhetoric and an approach to leadership that suggests that the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down instead of what we all know. The strength of leadership is based on who you lift up. The strength of an American president, which is one who understands that the vast majority of us have more in common than what separates us.
Madam Vice President, more than 70% of people
that is
tell
about
pollsters,
turning the page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Brett.
More than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam Vice President.
You and I both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade, people have become. But listen. Over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president, one, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous, and that people are exhausted with someone who professes to be a leader who spends full time demeaning and engaging in personal grievances and it being about him instead of the American people. People are tired of that.
If that's the case, why is half the country supporting him? Why is he beating you in a lot of swing states? Why, if he's as bad as you say, that half of this country is now supporting this person who could be the 47th president of the United States? Why is that happening?
This is an election for president of the United States. It's not supposed to be easy.
I know, but
it's not supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a cakewalk for anyone.
So are they misguided, the 50%? Are they stupid? What is it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within.
Yeah. All right. So the enemy within he was talking about were the terrorists that you allowed to come into this country and the illegal immigrants who want to do us harm and all the cells that the FBI and the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security admit are here now at record levels. But those are the enemies that are within that Donald Trump wants to confront. And Kamala Harris, you do not. And anyway, I want to get your comments. How do you think she did? Let's bring up a few comments. Robin Freeman de Leon. Hello, Robin. Good to hear from you. Good morning, Tom. About the interview last night, I just really don't know how a person can say so many words and still say absolutely nothing at the same time. Robin, good friend, good to hear from you. You're right. She didn't say anything. What she did say is that everything that we did wrong over the past 3.5 years was Donald Trump's fault. We need to turn the page. And then I will continue to do what's wrong, but I'll still blame Donald Trump for the next 4 years if I'm elected president of the United States. I don't think most people are buying that. Enough are, though, I think. And by the way, this whole idea that Donald Trump at his rallies is the one who's demeaning the U.S. citizens, I don't know if she's ever been to a rally. Do you know what he did the other day in a rally when there were 2 medical emergencies? Donald Trump stopped the town hall and tried to uplift the spirits of the people who were distraught about what was happening in the audience. He started playing beautiful music and songs that they all loved. That was encouraging. And Kamala Harris came in and said, something's wrong with Donald Trump. I don't think he's well, that kind of thing. And all the Democrats slammed him for caring. And they never put in the fact that what he was doing was caring about the individuals that were hurting in his crowd. That's why he stopped, not for political gain, but to care for the individuals in his crowd. I believe it was the Democratic Party were calling U.S. citizens deplorables and those types of things, and a threat to democracy. The last administration, the current one, Joe Biden, remember the red wall behind him? What did he call Republicans? He called them a threat, dangerous, and you go down the whole vaccine issue. All the unvaccinated Donald Trump, MAGA, crazy Republicans are the reason why this pandemic is here. That's not uplifting the people. Again, projection. Let's go to another comment here. Adam's going to bring that up. Jim, this VP is too incompetent to be a leader for our nation. I couldn't agree more, Jim. I thought this was on her part, is a horrific interview. She never answered the question. She never took any accountability. What would have been refreshing is if she just leveled with the American people and said, yeah, we got some things wrong. And because of that, I'm no longer going to align with a Joe Biden presidency. I know that I'm further left than Joe Biden is. I'm more progressive and more radical than he is, but I've learned some lessons about what my policies do. I am now that's why I'm shifting policies, and I will implement these things that, frankly, I agree with Donald Trump on. That would have been refreshing because clearly her policies only destroy the foundation of this country and just destroy it from the foundation. And then they want to build back better from that. Destroy the foundations and then build something entirely new. That is a Kamala Harris and a Joe Biden platform that they've been running on in 2020, and they still believe in mightily today. Thank you for your comments and your questions and for interacting with our guest today, Gary Wolfram with Hillsdale College. Appreciate it so much. We'll be back tomorrow here on Tom Jordan Live. Until then, God bless you. Have a good day.